Hello, my name is Caleb Robinson, and today I'll be presenting my infographic on the human cell to you. In the center of the cell, we can see there is an orange sphere-shaped thing called the nucleus, and within the nucleus is a nucleolus, and they are basically the same thing, but I will be explaining the entirety of that later on. As you can see, there is a blue ring on the outside of the cell, and that is called the cell membrane. It is what keeps everything inside, and it's made of a lot of different things, but mainly proteins. The inside of the cell is called the cytoplasm, and it's a blue. It's shown as the light blue aqua fluid that suspends all the organelles, which are the organs of the cell, in the cell and stops them from moving around too much. The organelles themselves are like the organs of the cell, and some of them labeled here are the lysosomes, the centrosomes, the rough and the smooth endoplasmic reticulums, the ribosomes, the Golgi body, the mitochondria, and the vacuole. But there is a lot more, including the centrioles, some microtubules, a lot of other stuff that we will cover in the other slides. As this is just very, very simple. And it's just basic. It's really basic. Okay, on to the next part. Now, onto the cell itself. A cell is the basic building block of living things, and it's found in everything alive. In the bottom left corner, we can see there are 5 different types of cells, as we will just be covering basic cells. We will be covering the basic cells, but there are 5 different types of cells. There are brain cells, liver cells, muscle cells, intestinal cells, and blood cells. The cell itself is kind of like a sphere shape, it's kind of more like an egg, and it has a plasma membrane, as I mentioned before, and it's a structure that contains the genetic material, or DNA, and carries out functions necessary for life. DNA is kind of like a cell's set of biological instructions that it can use to tell itself what to do, kind of like a guide. And cells are important as they provide functions such as metabolism, growth, reproduction, and stimuli, which are all intricate and very unique, and they are all needed as we need them to live. Next thing we'll be covering is cell division. Something I just want to mention quickly. DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid, is a cell's set of biological instructions, as I mentioned previously to this. DNA replication is a process by where cells make copies of their genetic material. This process is necessary because cells need to reproduce as they're constantly dying, because if you clench your fist and you see white, that's dead cells. Now, as soon as those cells clear, they've either reproduced or they've just sunk back into your skin and you can't see them anymore. Because the cells are always reproducing, as they constantly need to be there because they're constantly dying and they are very important to human life. So if our cells just kept dying instead of reproducing, then we would die in like 30 minutes. DNA replication happens in 3 main steps. The first step is the DNA molecule itself opens up and splits into 2 separate strands at a specific spot called the origin. Now, I will explain this on a diagram in a later cell, if you remember this. The step 2 is proteins and enzymes then work together to prepare the strands to be copied. And then a special enzyme called DNA polymerase then makes copies of the DNA using separated strands as a guide. In summary, DNA replication is a crucial process that ensures that each new cell has an exact copy of the genetic material from the original cell. This allows cells to grow, repair themselves, and reproduce. And on the right here, you can see a simple diagram of the way cells move through their life, and the main fully grown part is the prophase. Then it moves into the promedia phase, where it starts to rearrange itself. And then just after the metaphase, it splits, and the chromosomes all split, and then the cell starts to split in the telophase and cytokinesis phase. And then the new cell in the interphase then grows and forms back into a prophase cell. Next, we have the chromosomes in the nucleus, which are very important. Now, on the right here diagram, I want to label the bottom right strand, that is the DNA itself, the deoxyribonucleic acid. And you see this is strung out and wrapped around histones, which have their own use, but they're kind of like a packing thing. The histones and the DNA then become something called a nucleosome, and these nucleosomes are wrapped together into thin, long strands called chromatin. It's not labeled, but chromatin is then strung together into chromosomes, and chromatin are very important as they are the uncondensed form of chromosomes and help control gene use as they are more accurate. The nucleus is like the brain of the cell, and it holds all the cell's important information. This information is the DNA, and it is stored in and on the chromosomes, as I just mentioned, because it is DNA. Chromosomes is histones in DNA. The nucleus also controls what the cell does. It does this by deciding which of the cell's instructions or genes should be used and when. That also comes down to the chromatin, which helps decipher those genes and pick which ones. The nucleus makes sure that the cell's information stays correct and complete, and in simpler terms, the nucleus is the control center of the cell, and it manages the control center of the cell, storing and managing the cell's important information, making sure it stays correct and accurate. Now, if you remember back to just before, when I was saying that the DNA has two strands, you can look on the left here, and you can see that the DNA actually does have two strands, and the orange and yellow things depicted in between those strands are called nucleotides, but those are very in-depth and we won't be covering them in this video. On the left is RNA, and it's similar to DNA and is used instead of DNA in viruses, but it's also used in the human cell, which we will be covering today, obviously. You can also see nucleotides, but there's not as much, and there's no second strand. I think they're called double helix. RNA and chromatin. RNA stands for ribonucleic acid, and it's a molecule that helps build proteins. Proteins are like little machines that help the cell do its job. And another important aspect of the nucleus is the ribosomes. Ribosomes are like tiny factories that build these proteins based on the instructions from the RNA. So basically, the RNA will take the instructions from the nucleus to the ribosomes and tell the ribosomes to build the proteins. The nucleus also contains other important structures labeled earlier, such as chromatin, which is the uncondensed form of chromosomes and helps control how they are used. And in simpler terms, RNA is like a messenger that carries instructions from the nucleus to parts of the cell where proteins are made. Ribosomes are like factories that build proteins, and chromatin helps control which genes are used and when. The next part of the cell we'll be covering is the endoplasmic reticulum. Now, before we start, there are two endoplasmic reticulums, and the one labeled on the right here is the rough endoplasmic reticulum. As you can see, it has these little sphere-shaped bumps, which are actually the ribosomes, as mentioned earlier. Now, let's get on to it. The endoplasmic reticulum, or the ER, which we will be calling it in this video, is like a network of tiny sacs and tubes that are found inside the cells. There are two types of endoplasmic reticulums. There are the rough and the smooth. The rough endoplasmic reticulums has many tiny helpers called ribosomes, as I just said, and these ribosomes help make proteins, as mentioned earlier. The rough endoplasmic reticulum is kind of like a factory for proteins, and it helps make them. The smooth endoplasmic reticulum, on the other hand, does not have ribosomes, and it helps the cell make fats, get rid of bad stuff, and the smooth endoplasmic reticulum overall is like a factory that helps the cell make important things and get rid of bad stuff. In short, and deal with fats. In short, the ERs help the cell make, package, and store important substances. The next part of the cell, which is undoubtedly my favorite, is the mitochondria. If you look in the background here before we start, I just want to mention there are a few parts of the cell, the few parts of the mitochondria we'll cover in a second. The mitochondria are organelles that play a crucial role in producing energy for the cell and can be thought as the cell's power plants. Mitochondria have their own set of DNA and can reproduce without help. This brings up the amazing fact that scientists think that the mitochondria at one point in time was separate from the cell, and it eventually formed a symbiotic relationship with the cell after somehow coming together and learning how to work together. The mitochondria have two walls, the inner and the outer wall, but today we'll just focus on the inner wall, and that's the important part because the outer wall is basically just protective. The inner wall has wrinkles called cristae, and these cristae increase the surface area on the inside of the mitochondria, allowing the cell to produce more energy due to the increased surface area. Now, the cell itself, the mitochondria itself, has a fluid on the inside of the inner wall called the matrix, which contains enzymes and other chemicals that help make energy. Mitochondria mix sugar and oxygen mainly to make the energy in the first place, and this is called cellular respiration. They keep the cell biologically healthy also, and in conclusion, the mitochondria play a very, very crucial role in producing energy, and they are really needed as they also keep the cell biologically healthy and make sure that everything is just good overall. The next part of the cell we'll be covering is not that prominent, but it is also important and it helps the cell. It's kind of like a skeletal structure of the cell overall. Microtubules are short strand-like tubes that are located all through the cell's cytoplasm, which I mentioned earlier at the start of the video or infographic, and it is the space-filling fluid. That is the cytoplasm, not the microtubules. Its main job is to keep the cell's form, as I mentioned, it's kind of like a skeletal structure. They are like long strand fans, and it helps chromosomes move around during cell division, and helps smaller yet needed cell parts called organelles, which are the organs of the cell, also mentioned earlier, move around and get around the cell easier. So they're kind of like, if you're walking up a mountain, like for example a tall mountain, you're gonna grab on a rope to help you pull up or pull around. Yep, that's it. The next cell organelle is the Golgi apparatus and the lysosomes. The point of the Golgi apparatus is like similar to a checking station in a factory to make sure that proteins produced by the ribosomes on the rough endoplasmic reticulum or just around the cell are good for use and can be pushed out of the cell in secretion, used in the plasma membrane, or finally sent out to be used by the lysosomes for further use. Now, the lysosomes themselves are sphere-shaped membrane organelles that consume and destroy cellular waste and debris by breaking them down in hydraulic enzymes that reside within their sphere-shaped walls. So they are important as they get rid of waste. One of the next parts of the cell, one of the last parts, is that we'll be covering today is the vacuole. It is small and round, and there are a few scattered through each cell, but they are important. Let me explain. The point of the vacuole is to look after the cell's acidity in the cytoplasm to make sure it's not too acidic and destroy any of the other organelles, and to keep the turgor pressure, which is the thing that pushes the cytoplasm against the cell membrane, good. Otherwise, it'll just collapse in, it'll be kind of mushy and stuff, and it won't really stay in shape. The vacuoles regulate and contain the storage and transport of substances by controlling and regulating the transportation of key proteins in the cell, while also responding to abiotic and biotic cell stresses, which makes this an absolutely amazing part of the cell that is really important and just overall impressive for its size. One of the last parts of the cell is the centrioles. The centrioles are two barrel-shaped organelles that are located within the cytoplasm, and they most of the time stay close. Their job is to organize the microtubules labeled earlier and help determine the location of other organelles so the nucleus can regulate cell efficiency easier by knowing where all its stuff is, kind of like its setup, and by keeping track of everything. It helps the cell during cell division, so each new cell has the same amount of each thing, and it keeps the cell accurate. Thank you, my moderator, or anybody trying to learn about the cell, for watching this video. I hope you have a great day, and goodbye.